That's the stuff that's within your control, and that enabling you. And I've always, when we've had graduates who've joined us and giving them that training, um, there are lots of textbooks and courses and trainers, who can give lots of advice, but ultimately you have to feel comfortable about the content, and that only comes through knowing it, which, as you say, then that allows you to just relax and focus on who you are in that meeting.
Welcome to another episode of Speaking of Success. Today's guest is Asif Choudry, Sales and Marketing Director at Resource, CIM Fellow, Chartered Marketeer, and the founder of the Comms Hero community. He also hosts the You're My Comms Hero podcast. From salesperson to communications maven, Asif has transformed the industry landscape. For a decade now, he's emceed the Comms Hero event, collaborating with hundreds of speakers and impacting 14,000 comms professionals. Asif's journey showcases the power of effective communication, both for himself and countless comms professionals. Join us as we explore Asif's path and the ripple effect that public speaking has had on it. Asif, welcome. It's really great to talk to you. How are you doing?
Spencer, thank you. Yeah, very good. It's a pleasure to be on as a host on a podcast. It's always weird to be on the other side, but always a pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. So I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while because you have such good experience across Comms Heroes, Resource, your time before that. So I thought maybe we'll start with taking you back in time, and maybe if you could share with us, what was your initial very first steps into speaking and presenting when you started working?
Yeah, it was, I joined the print industry back in 1995 now as a fresh-faced graduate. And part of that was of the graduate scheme was I was privileged to have a lot of off-the-job training. And one of those opportunities that presented itself was the ability. We were doing a workshop session on how to create an order-winning culture, because it was a sales conference. So we were there in an organization that had really experienced salespeople. We were in a HE or FE college, which it was at the time. And so we were presenting in a huge lecture theatre where all the tables or the benches are going up from the front all the way to the back. So when we were in the workshop outside of the main auditorium, I thought it was a good idea to put myself forward to present what we'd actually done as a group, which was a really good idea until I got onto the lecture theatre stage element and then saw, I don't know how many, maybe 150 people sat on this old school lecture theatre style as it's getting higher and higher. And then the actual magnitude of what I'd thrown myself into dawned on me at that point. And I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? So I just threw myself in at the deep end. And to be honest with you, if I hadn't have done that, then everything else that went after that just wouldn't have happened, because it was how to, making yourself known within a room full of experience that had all the CEOs and the top management of the organization. And I'm there within the first few weeks as a graduate. So it definitely put me on the map with that organization. But from a confidence point of view, it's phenomenal, because everything I've done after that in terms of presentations, it kind of taught me that you should put yourself in those situations and step out of your comfort zone, purely unintentionally, because like I say, in the workshop, it sounded like a good idea to put myself forward. And it was ultimately, but had anyone explained the whole circumstances and the scenario that I'd be presenting in, then I would definitely have said no, because I literally just joined the company. So it's that was definitely my first experience, and nearly 30 years later, remember that vividly. Definitely a good experience.
Yeah, and I think it's really great for people to hear, because I think one of the things I talk about a lot is we're all the same. We're all nervous, and when we've never done it before, then that's when we're the most nervous, and over time we get more and more comfortable with those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I guess that experience for you gave you almost like the intense uh, nerves about it, but also the intense adrenaline rush when you did it
Yeah,
and you finished, and it's like, wow, like, so you got like
yeah.
both of those in that one experience.
Absolutely. You just the recognition afterwards, and as a fresh faced graduate, new into a company with lots of established, long standing people who were there. Salespeople, a profession I wanted to get into, lots of experts who were doing millions and millions of pounds of sales, and people that I looked up to, and there were names that were mentioned. For them coming up to you afterwards and saying, "Oh, that was great," and you just think, "Wow," as somebody who's naturally uh, at that stage, certainly before my career started, an introvert, you just think that that was a big shift for me in terms of it took me out of that comfort zone of being introverted and shying away from opportunities like that, because naturally I would have said no. So it completely changed me as an individual for the better, and probably propelled my career within that organization in the very, very early days as well. So yeah, good experience, but definitely a mix of those emotions as you've mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a great message for people to hear, especially the introvert side of things, because I think there are so many talented speakers that are introverts, and I think
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of people that may think, "Oh, I'm too shy," or "I can't do that," or but actually, really, like I've spoken to a lot of speakers in the last 15 years, and it's really probably at least 30-40% would identify as introvert. So I think it's a good message for people to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, like following on from that, I know obviously before you joined Resource, you were in sales for a while. So where did your public speaking journey go after that huge start?
Yeah, it was, it's hard to start at the top and work your way up. It's quite difficult to get beyond that. So I think I always saw um, the public speaking element of, even if it's one to one in uh, kind of client conversations, having had the benefit of that experience of going into some situations, most of the situations tended to be people that I'd not met before. This was obviously way before the introduction of Zoom and Teams and virtual calls. Everything was in person. So that natural sales process was, you had to get in the door and you were meeting somebody completely cold. So that same amount of preparation, adrenaline, nerves, meeting somebody for the first time in person, all those things happened, but I got to practice that day in, day out as part of my career. So I was fortunate in that respect. But in terms of actual speaking, that came from having to do tender presentations, for example. So when we submit for a tender, being invited in to present what our submission was about, preparing the decks for that, and then actually doing the speaking in front of smaller audiences of maybe 5 or 6 in an office environment, in a meeting room. But then I had opportunities to be able to do speaker opportunities through just the personal brand and what have you. So within the housing sector itself, being invited to speak about comms within the industry, that, or one of the industries that you're working towards generating your own personal brand and getting your name out there as a business. So being invited to speak about those subjects that I'm passionate about was really good, and that then was the next stage for me of taking it from outside of the day job, which was just meeting customers and doing tender presentations, into doing actual presentations in front of audiences at conference events. So starts off with invitations for doing one of 3 workshops that people choose to go in to see in the morning or the afternoon, and you're thinking, oh, I wonder if anyone's going to choose the one that I've put forward, because you're trying to put forward those engaging titles and getting those hooks for people to come along. So there might have been audiences of maybe 25 to 45, 50 people in the workshops, to then getting invited to speak at larger events where there might have been 100 people in the room, where you were talking in the main auditorium as opposed to in the breakout. So it kind of just continued to grow just by taking up the opportunities, and in some instances actually volunteering or putting myself forward to contacts and saying, oh, look, this is what I talk about. Would there be an opportunity to have a chat about that? And social media was one area that certainly was a catalyst for me. So I'm not talking about, you know, presentations and speaking on SEO and PPC. I'm actually talking about social media masterclasses on how to do personal brand before as it is now. You know, there's lots of commentators and speakers on that subject, but you know, there isn't anyone necessarily helping executives and CEOs use their personal brand and understand why they shouldn't be afraid of it and should embrace it. So that was one area that I tended to do a lot of speaking on over the years. So just finding your subject and making sure that you're visible to people, that they will invite you to come and do speaker sessions. So that's what propelled the opportunities into the pure, the purest speaker gigs as opposed to doing
Yeah,
client presentations.
yeah. It's a great journey. I want to take you back a bit to the being in sales and going to clients, because it's like I think we started, because I also graduated in 95 and I was also in the north of England, and I started out in ad agencies and design agencies, and I
Yeah,
had a very similar thing, that I was driving to clients or prospective clients and having to present, and I think, like, back then, when we're like, young, fresh out of college, and you're probably meeting with somebody who's 20 years in the game, and you think, oh, they're
yeah,
so experienced. Like,
yeah.
is there any memories of what that process was like? Because I can imagine many people listening that might be more junior, more starting out in their career, they're going through something similar right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all you can do is control what you present until you actually arrive. So, you know, do the preparation, do the content, make sure literally the premise I've always worked to is that, and not just now, but it's kind of what I've grounded myself in, was the fact that um, your slides are just a background, and they're certainly not there as a reminder for you. So you know that and that's probably where a lot of people go wrong, where they, you know, the old school way before doing PowerPoints and stuff was having cue cards with your notes on. And to a lot of people, that might seem really alien now. But, you know, there wasn't a HDMI connection with a LED screen when you went to every meeting. You don't even have to ask now because there's always that available. But before, you'd have to present from hard copy printouts or whatever it was, but you've just got to make sure that content is really ingrained and you understand it, and you could deliver your content without the need of the visual aid there for you as a prompter, but it's there as a nice backdrop for the listener and the viewer um, of your presentation. So I think that's really important too. That kind of premise hasn't really changed. It's just the tech element that's changed now. So doing the preparation is absolute must. And then when you turn up, you can't control what the other person or the people that you're presenting to are going to be like. You just have to have the courage and conviction in your own content and your own style, and you will adjust that based on, it might be the greeting that you receive when you arrive, that makes you think, oh, this is going to be quite formal, or it could go completely opposite direction. Think, oh, I can actually be a bit more chatty, a bit more informal here. And the questions that are raised during your presentation will be a good guide as to what the personality of the individuals that you're presenting to are actually like. And you've just got to respond accordingly, like you would do in any situation in your personal life. You know, you have to change and adapt your style based on the audience, because ultimately that's why you're there, to impart information to the audience that you're in front of.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a good point. I think, like, let's call it emotional intelligence, but
Yeah,
having that, like, start to build that muscle of read the room a bit, in terms of, yeah,
yeah,
are they wanting to do a bit of chit chat first, or is it straight to business? Like, what's their body language like, and all
yeah,
that kind of stuff. But I think I'll pick up on something you said, because I think, like, it underpins many of the things that you were talking about, is that if you practice your content enough, it gives you the confidence. Like, it's almost like the first way of building confidence. It was for me, that, like, the more I practiced, I knew that I knew the content, so I needed to look at things less. I didn't need notes so much, and I could focus on the room. And I think, like, when we're trying to build confidence in the early days, then things like over indexing on practice is normally doesn't leave you too far wrong.
No, I totally agree because that's the stuff that's within your control, and that enabling you. And I've always, when we've had graduates who've joined us and giving them that training, um, there are lots of textbooks and courses and trainers, who can give lots of advice, but ultimately you have to feel comfortable about the content, and that only comes through knowing it, which, as you say, then that allows you to just relax and focus on who you are in that meeting. That engagement is the absolute critical point, because if you're not reading the room, making eye contact, all the, enunciating clearly and speaking clearly and at the right pace, then you're going to struggle to keep your audience. And that's ultimately what any speaker's trying to do. They've just got to keep that attention, and allowing you to be yourself and be able to be agile to respond to questions. And that preparation is key. And you've almost got to kind of uh, do a doomsday scenario where if all the tech failed and nobody could see your slide deck, what would you do?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately, I think you've got to play it in that scenario. Well, okay, I don't have a backdrop, but I can still deliver all my content. I know my slides inside out. I know the sequence. I know what sort of questions come up, and I can still pick the questions. Could you deliver it without your visual aids? And if your visual aids are all masses of bullet points, then you will probably struggle, because you end up being reliant on that. Whereas there's certainly, over the last 10 years, there's been a huge shift into being able to put a slide with just an image on with zero text on. And that was a complete no-no 10 plus years ago. It might have even been sooner. But that is a real big plus, because that's forced a lot of speakers to get out of that comfort mode of having the content on, there might be 20 slides in a deck and each one's got 10 bullet points on. That's a lot of content for you as an individual to remember, let alone keep the audience engaged for 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But it's good advice. I love the can you do it if all the tech fails, and what will
Yeah.
happen then? So you fast forward a bit, you join Resource. So maybe if you can give us a 20-second, who is Resource, and how did that lead into Comms Hero, which I think is where there's some good stuff for people.
Yeah. Well, Resource, we're a communications business that has its grounding in print, but over the years we've just adjusted to market demands and customer demands with introduction of a creative agency, events management, and that communications business. We get asked to do projects now, which we're going to be creating multi-channel campaigns to do behavioral change, through to somebody saying, look, I just need some artwork for a 2-page A5 leaflet, and can you print it for me and deliver it as well? So, and everything else that happens in between. So we're quite a unique business in that you can have a full-blown £500,000 creative campaign that touches out of home, radio, video on demand, and is full of digital advertising as well. And something to where you may have a digital only campaign, or something that's personalized direct mail. So there isn't really many of the businesses, should I say, that would be able to do that. And where ComZero came from 10 years ago now, because it's the 10th anniversary now in 2024,
Yeah.
was that we work with a lot of communicators in local government and social housing, in NHS, in local councils as well. And we just thought that what they do, totally different to private sector, is they've got a reduction in budgets that are controlled not by them or the results of the organization, is controlled by political forces. They usually have smaller team numbers, and the headcount's a lot less than the private sector marketing teams. And we just thought, you know what, these guys and what they do and what they have to do each year is pretty heroic. So how can we give something back to those people, as opposed to just taking orders from them? And we do great service, and we've always done great work for them, but how do we start giving back? And before community became a thing, as it's, there are communities everywhere now, but in business. But before that point, we just thought, okay, well, let's see if we can create a community where people can share this good practice, they can connect with each other and interact. but also importantly, can we put events on that are just different to all the events that happen now? Opportunities to unleash their creativity, and it's events that were just dedicated to speakers who had lived experience in the profession, talking about real challenges that are happening now that other people who are listening and watching that content can take away and do something with tomorrow. And that was a key remit for us. And we started off just as a one-off experiment
Yeah.
in May 2014, and 10 years later, we've done 20 plus events. We've got an organic growth of maybe 14,000 people in the community, which isn't massive compared to communities now, which are 500,000 numbers. But the difference is that we engage with a lot of people, and I think that's the important thing, because they're people who we work with on a day-to-day basis, and it's our opportunity to go beyond order taking and actually give them some content back and introduce them to other fellow comms professionals. So it's a really rewarding part of doing what we do for a living as a business,
Yeah.
and a lot of the people in the organization get involved and support that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I mean, like, if I think, like, you've been doing this for 10 years, so you've seen an awful lot of speakers across the stages in those
Yeah,
10 years. And I think one of the things I've loved about what you've done is you've given so many, like, you've given people opportunities from different backgrounds and different
yeah,
experiences. Like, you've had people on the stage that have only got maybe 2 or 3 years experience, but also people that have had like 20 years experience. And I
yeah,
think, like, it's such a lovely thing to do, to give people that kind of exposure. And that is, it's a
yeah,
bit like your first story where you didn't realize what you're about to walk into. But I think
yeah.
giving people that experience is really lovely. And can you speak to, and this could be like people you've seen or from your own experience, or even the people who are attending, because I see comms people that they spend their whole day communicating with senior management, communicating with the media. Like, what's the impact for somebody to learn this skill of being a confident speaker and presenter? It doesn't always have to be in front of 300 people. It could be 2 people in an office. But of all the people you've seen and all the things that you've seen, like, what would you say some of the big impacts are from being
Yeah,
a
I'd say
speaker?
they're huge, because as having worked with many comms professionals over that 30-year period, the majority, this hasn't changed over that period of time. The majority of those communicators, when they're communicating for other people, have energy, passion, confidence, creativity. But when it comes to themselves, it's completely the opposite. They're very modest, almost too modest, not wanting to blow their own trumpet, not wanting to push themselves out of their own comfort zone. So I think the opportunity to have those speaker um, sessions, in effect, whether it's two people, because as a communicator, you're presenting all the time, you're in the art of persuasion. So pitching ideas to senior leadership teams, that is a presentation skill. You might not have a slide deck, but maybe you should have a slide deck. So these are all the things that you've got to factor in. And that confidence that we talked about before, that for introverts is even more important, but it's important for all communicators that they are taking these opportunities. And a lot of the speakers we've had either on the podcast or on the um, in-person events or the virtual events when we were doing them during the pandemic, a lot of the people it's the first time they've ever done anything of that nature, and that feeling afterwards exactly how I felt after that first session. So I think the impact on those people is that, oh wow, I can do this. And it's not just applied to presentations, it's a renewed confidence in pitching more creative ideas to senior leadership team, especially in the world of social media, where you've got platforms that allow you, they need you to be more creative and more confident with your um, the content that you're posting. If that confidence comes from you presenting in front of the CEO or the senior leadership team, or 100 or 2 or 300 people, then that's never going to be a bad thing for what you do day to day. So, to overcome those nerves in front of a group of people, when you're doing it on a one-to-one basis, or even yourself, that becomes a lot easier. It's never easy, but it just becomes a lot easier for sure. So I'd say that's probably the biggest impact that somebody can take from taking the opportunity to do a presentation session of some description.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's for me the big one is, yeah, self-confidence, self-belief, self-esteem. I
Yeah,
think it's and that applies not just to your professional life, but it also goes over into your personal life as well. So I think it's definitely almost like the biggest impact that you can have. But
yeah.
is there any other things that you noticed outside of confidence and belief? Are there any other impacts you've seen when people get good at this?
I think their reputation and the impact. I think seeing the the thing you get a lot of reward from yourself as an individual is seeing the effect it has on other people when people are just, even it might just be an acknowledgement of nodding at your content or smiling when you said a particular point. And that confidence it gives you, that because everyone suffers from imposter syndrome, doesn't matter
Yeah,
what stage you are in your career. And sometimes that affirmation from people, peers especially, when you're delivering content, you do realize that you know what you're talking about and you have got good knowledge. But when you're we're our own worst critics. So you need that external kind of validation from people, which is not something you should crave, but it's certainly something you should test and look for, because otherwise you're just operating in an echo chamber. So if you're presenting to what could potentially be people who know the same amount or more than you, then that's when you're putting yourself in a situation that will actually work well for you in your career, not just for presenting, but also knowing that the experience you've built over time, the knowledge that you've invested time in building, actually is worth something, because it's being used by other people, or even if they're just agreeing that, oh, that's a good point, and I'm with you on that, and that's good enough sometimes to just reassure you that, look, I do know what I'm doing and I'm good at this job.
yeah, yeah. It's a great point because, and I think when you look at you receive a compliment from somebody, whether that's I agree with that, or yeah, you're right, or somebody's like, oh, that was amazing. Like, it doesn't really matter what level of compliment it is. I think it's really important that people take it in and say thank you, because for many of us, especially us Brits, like like we can go, oh no, 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 or
Yeah,
oh, I
yeah,
wasn't that good, or because in our heads we're like, oh, but I made a mistake, or this didn't go right. But actually, it's such a powerful move to
yeah,
take that compliment and say thank you and just sit in it for a
yeah,
second, because I think you're right. It really gives you that, again, it continues to build that self-belief and helps with things like imposter syndrome, because you're right, we all get it. It's there's as they always say, there's people who get nervous and there's the liars. It's
yeah,
like
yeah. Absolutely.
it's like everybody does, but yeah, it's really nice. And I guess that's like, in a way, that's why Comms Hero is such a good community event, because it's also a very supportive, safe,
Absolutely.
like environment, which is almost like the perfect place to start in a way.
We've had last year, 2023's event, we had five master's students who were at Leeds Beckett University. So they'd never had a speaking opportunity. So they were on the stage in front of 150 people,
Yeah.
and they were visiting the UK as students from India, Nigeria, Ghana. And so it was brilliant for them to have that experience. So, people coming to a completely different country and being in an environment, a room full of PR professionals who they respect and admire, to go up on stage and do a panel discussion was phenomenal. Even holding the microphone and speaking when you can hear your own voice across
Hmm.
speakers in a room, that's daunting enough on its own. And doing that in front of 150 people is amazing. When you get a lot of joy from seeing people, the impact it has on them. So that whole Comms Hero community, the mantra we've had from day one, and which we still hold dear, is celebrating the heroics that comms people perform every day. And we have to have, our job is really to remind people to not forget to celebrate the stuff that they're doing, because just because you're doing it for your day job doesn't mean it's not brilliant. But that modest, inherent modest quality comes out all too often. Where hopefully there is a time when we don't have to remind people to take the pat on the back and the credit that they've deserved for the work that they've done.
Yeah.
But for 10 years, that need hasn't gone away. So it's a really important part of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine for those students that English is probably their second, third
Absolutely.
language, and I think that adds another layer of
Yeah.
complexity and like where you don't like how you sound in a second language, or so I think yes,
Yeah.
to for anybody to do that, but
Yeah.
especially as a beginner, I think it's we should definitely take our hat off
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
give the compliments. Um, so I imagine somebody listening who is, more of a beginner, more at the start of wanting to grow this skill. What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out? Where should they start?
I suppose, don't, I'll tell you what not to do, which is watch TEDx talks, because people will get the wrong impression of what public speaking is. It's not necessarily just you on an open stage with this massive TEDx letters behind you, and talking about some really profound subject. That's not what it is, because it's you actually talking about something you are passionate about and that you are trained to do, as in like the knowledge. What you've got to focus is on how you deliver that. So making sure the content is something that is second nature to you. And that's the real key thing here, because then you can focus on your delivery. If you're trying to focus on both of those things at the same time, then one of them will suffer. As a an experienced speaker is going to suffer, but experienced speakers spend less time on the delivery because they're experienced, right? So, as somebody who's just coming into the speaking, then and just the word speaking is presenting. That's what it is. You don't have to be a public speaker to be a presenter. Everyone has that opportunity. So I'd say make sure the content is bang on, and that's something that you could deliver without the slide prompters. And then you can focus on just being yourself, all the usual stuff that you find on Google searches and YouTube videos about, don't worry about getting nervous, making sure that you breathe. It sounds really simple, but when you're on stage, the ability to breathe in a relaxed way somehow just disappears. And something we take for granted to do naturally all the time, uh, that innate skill, it becomes a skill. Breathing actually becomes a skill. And that's hard to get your head around, because I can breathe, right? That's not a problem. Well, when you're in front of 10, 20, 50, 150 people, your breathing will change, and your ability to do that and speak at the same time becomes far more difficult. So there's lots of things people should prepare themselves for, which they wouldn't ordinarily think, because the focus is on my slides have got to be really cool, and I've got to put humor in there. If you don't tell jokes and that's not your personality, then don't tell jokes. Don't feel forced to do that. So you have to be yourself, and know your content, and the rest will just come with practice. And sometimes throw yourself into opportunities, because if you're waiting for speaker opportunities, you're going to have to wait potentially 10 years before you get the chance. So you've got to go and find the opportunities and put yourself forward in the smaller environments and gain the confidence, and then really look for the bigger opportunities and put yourself forward for those.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. I think like, yeah, focus on the smaller events. The bigger events will take care of themselves. Like,
Yeah.
I did for a good few years. I was doing lots and lots and lots of small stuff, and I joined
Yeah.
like the Meetup app, and I would
Yeah.
just speak to whoever's got like a small community. Do you want me to come and talk about storytelling? And it was like 4 people or something like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was such a great like learning ground
Yeah.
and building myself. And eventually one of those suddenly said, "Hey, we've got this big conference we
Yeah.
do in October. Do you want
Exactly.
to?" So
Yeah.
like suddenly you're like, so yeah, I always think like that's great advice, because it's a bit like my gran used to say that if you look after the pennies, the pounds will take care of themselves.
Very much so. Very
And it's
much
almost
so.
And it's almost the same thing with speaking opportunities. Um, so I want to give you a chance in a couple of minutes just to tell people where they can connect with you and hear more from you and things like that. But maybe as a finishing thing, is there anything we haven't spoke about or anything you want to mention or any last pieces of advice for people?
I think we've probably covered it all, but like I said, just don't overcomplicate this process. And like I say, you'll everyone's going to be a TEDx speaker one day, but just don't let that be your starting point.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. Cool. So where can people find you? Where do you want people to go and connect with you?
Yeah. Well, it used to be on X or Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter, but
Yeah.
that's changed over the last year or so. So best place is to find me on LinkedIn, Asif Choudry.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'll make sure I put a link and then people can find you there.
Brilliant.
So all that remains is to say thank you very much for sharing your journey and your experience. There was some really great information there for people. So thank you so much.
Pleasure, Spencer, and thanks for the opportunity.
And I'll see you next time.